My name is Sharon Constanson. I am chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce in the UK, and I welcome you to another one of our many webinars that we hold a year. But it's wonderful to have time with you, and we have got a wonderful guest with us today. But first of all, I think we all have to take note this is an amazing year, where I think a number I was given the other day that over 2 billion people will go to the polls this year in 64 countries, which is quite amazing, of which in our most direct interest is South Africa, UK and the US, as just 3 of those 64, which is going to make significant differences to business decisions, trade decisions, currency decisions, and economic outcomes. It is a very difficult time that we are operating in, and talking to a business this morning is the degree of pain companies are taking as a result of some of the geopolitical events of the world. So it's not an easy time that we are operating in. So because I know very little about this kind of thing, I'm now going to hand you over to Hal George, who please come join me on the panel, Hal. Hal is the Director of Investments of Old Mutual. He's been a professional investor all his 35 years of working, where he's worked London, Middle East, and he's now working for Old Mutual in South Africa, and working on their geopolitical requirements and insights that they're looking to. And therefore we have this wonderful opportunity to get such global views from somebody who is sitting in probably the city having the worst weather I've probably seen and heard of in absolute ages. Watching caravans and vans go off the bridge at De Kloof was horrific, and watching the fires burn down a house my family used to live in was a little close for comfort. So it's not a very pleasant time in Cape Town. I sincerely hope your winds have subsided somewhat, and where you are in Pinetown, I don't think you're quite as much risk as others are of the water and the fires you're getting elsewhere. So there's change everywhere in the world. We're suffering whatever way we look at it. But Hal, thank you very much for joining us. It is an absolute honor to listen to you. So I shall keep quiet now, Hal. I'll leave you to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharon, and good morning to everyone. We are now safe and sound in South Africa. It's been a tough week and some dreadful things happening, but it's a calm weather day today, so I'm pleased to say that, sitting here in Cape Town. Nice to see everyone all around the world. And as Sharon mentioned, it's a big year ahead. And the lens we've kind of chosen to look at it through is the lens of elections. And yeah, we have 2 billion plus people voting this year in various forms. And let me just set the scene for you, first of all, in terms of the geopolitical background, in terms of the election backdrop we have. And by the way, after we've done the election piece, I want to spend a bit of time on technology, because the technology trends are kind of piercing through everything. So I think that's important to bear in mind as well. So we'll keep that till the end. Okay, so we have elections plus technology. All right, the scene setter in one chart. In case anyone hadn't noticed, certainly my belief is that we've moved from a unipolar world led by the US to a multipolar world. And that is a very different and potentially more dangerous world. This chart shows you actually the number of interstate and internationalized internal conflicts. So that number has gone from give or take 8 or 10 on that chart to 32 or 40 per annum. So a lot more conflict going on. And as you get this bifurcation of power, you've got the US, you've got China, but also you've got a lot of other players. Obviously, Russia, Saudi Arabia on the rise, Iran on the rise, parts of Africa on the rise. So this multipolar world is leading to a lot more volatility. So geopolitics is up front and center now in terms of the way we need to think about our world and the way we need to run our businesses. And you can kind of pass it into this chart, this map rather, which is what is now called the Global South. The Global South is really in green on this map. You can't actually, it's actually not possible to Google a map of the Global South. This is a UN resolution in favor of a new international economic order or against the new international economic order. So the old world voted against the new international economic order, and everyone else voted in favor. So the green are the Global South, which is Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, India, China, and Russia. And the global south is coming together in a much more organized form. So you've got a multipolar world, plus you have a new bifurcated world. And this is the new battleground between, let's call it West and East. And we're seeing it played out in Europe within Ukraine. We're seeing it played out within the Middle East. We're seeing it played out across Northern Africa. So that's the kind of context one needs to think about. And my final context chart before I get into some elections which are relevant would be this one, the BRICS. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. South Africa snuck into that one a bit later on. This was a moniker kind of tabled by my old boss at Goldman Sachs, Jim O'Neill. Came up with this probably 30 years ago now, maybe 25 years ago, which was the BRIC bloc. South Africa joined later. And of course, BRICS has now expanded to include players like Iran and Ethiopia. And it's BRICS Plus now. So BRICS is kind of a synonym for the global south. And look at this economic GDP number. This is a purchasing power parity, and the BRICS are already larger than the old G7, what we call the West. So the economic power block is already shifting. And one of the great vanguards in this is kind of course, India. Not China, but India. China is as well, but look at this Indian growth chart. This is GDP growth in India back to, what is that, 2013. You've got 10 years of data here, plus a couple of forecasts. And you can see GDP growth in India has been, what is that, 6, 7, 8%, 9%, and of late, kind of 8, 9%. So India is now beginning to leave China in its wake. And India is becoming a global powerhouse. And it's flexing its muscles globally. It hosted the G20 just the end of last year. It took a year to prepare for this. It was an extraordinary global statement led by Prime Minister Modi. And that coalesced the entirety of India around this global endeavor. Encapsulated by, you may have seen this, I think middle of the way through last year, India made it to the South Pole of the moon. It's quite difficult to land on the South Pole of the moon, it turns out. More difficult than most other parts of the moon, and very important part to land on because that's where most of the ice is, which will lead to water, which will lead to habitable lunar stations. So India made it. They landed successfully. It's a very, very fluorescent landing module, which always confuses me. But this, again, is the kind of thing which puts countries on the map. China also landed. China's been landing on the moon for many years now. Russia attempted, but failed, sadly. Japan did land on the moon, but its landed upside down, which is unfortunate for Japan. The US landed a private enterprise about 2 months ago. So India now on the map. And India has elections. So we've got, what do we have? 1.5 billion people in India, most of whom will be voting, I would assume. A very keen democratic country. And Prime Minister Modi is up for re-election. This will happen in the coming 2 months. Prime Minister Modi is going to get re-elected. I think I can say that with some degree of certainty. These are the latest opinion polls. And if the opinion polls translate into current seats in Parliament, you can see towards the bottom of this slide, Prime Minister Modi would get over 300 seats compared to his main challenger, who would get 50. So this is a fairly straightforward vote, I think, in India coming up. I don't think it'll yield any surprises, particularly with the very large Hindu population voting for Prime Minister Modi along religious lines as well. But over the last 10 years, Prime Minister Modi's done a very, very good job, I must say, broadly speaking, economically speaking, in India. And I'm sure many of us have noticed the rising powerhouse that India now is. So no surprises, I don't think, in India. No surprises also in Russia, some would say, sadly. This is a chart I put together just before the election. The elections happened in Russia, what was it, last week now, or 2 weeks ago? These are the opposition candidates. 2 or 3 of these have since been, dare I say it, killed, or certainly have died. President Putin won the vote with, I think, 86% of the vote. I wouldn't particularly want to be within the 14% who voted against him, particularly. So it is an election. Russia is a democratic country, and Putin became re-elected. Now, the important thing about this is that opinion polls and popular opinion in Russia do matter to Putin. He does still rely on popular support. And popular support in this context is relevant because it is shifting in terms of the war in Ukraine. So this is quite an important shift we're seeing right now. Look at these opinion polls on your screen now. On the left, we have rising support for peace talks. At the top in purple, would you continue military operations in Ukraine? That's gone from yes, yes, yes to kind of. Or would you move to peace talks? Well, yes, we kind of would. So there's a move within Russia to secure some kind of peace agreement in Ukraine. And that's especially true amongst the young on the right. Most of the young would like to move to peace talks, and also true amongst the low-income Russians. And low-income young Russians are critical to Putin's popularity. That's where his support base are, and that's where the conscripts come from. So you can see young people don't really want to continue this operation or this war. And so it seems that all the indications within Russia, certainly, and we'll come back to Ukraine and the States, are that Russia actually would like to move more to a peaceful resolution. And we saw this in the interview that Tucker Carlson did with President Putin probably 3 weeks ago now. I'm not sure if any of you saw that Tucker Carlson interview. Fascinating two-hour interview. And President Putin effectively did offer an olive branch of peace within that interview. But you had to watch the entire interview to find it. It was not reported on Western television at all, which I felt was unfortunate. But Russia wants peace in Ukraine. And in Ukraine, President Zelensky still enjoys pretty broad-based support, but you can see some fracturing of that support happening pretty much as we speak. Some opposition candidates coming through, particularly the old head of the army. And President Zelensky has to date refused to have a scheduled election. It is meant to happen this year. It is not happening this year because Ukraine is at war. One can see a logical reason for that. But also Zelensky, I think, is a little nervous in terms of the opposition. And he's also nervous because the war, sadly, for Ukrainians in Ukraine is not going well. And you can see in these maps that the counteroffensive, the fabled counteroffensive, US funded, of Ukraine, which started the middle of last year, really made no ground whatsoever. And Russia held that ground across the 2,000-kilometer front line and indeed is now pushing Ukraine back a little. And if you can see that kind of red portion, that is in the Donbass, the old Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, many of whom are actually loyal to Mother Russia. And that's the part which Putin really would like, including Crimea, and allowing access to the Black Sea. So you can see how a peace agreement could land in terms of retaining that strip of land, leaving Ukraine to be a free state, but not to join NATO. And the Russians clearly want that. The Ukrainians, I think, will probably get there. And the American public clearly want it, because opinion polls in America are, quote unquote, tiring of funding Ukraine. You know, hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into Ukraine already. And if the populace or Biden doesn't get to a deal in Ukraine by November, and President Trump does become President Trump again, then Trump will get a settlement in Ukraine for them. That's Europe. That's Russia and Europe. Meanwhile, China, which does not have an election because it is not a democracy, 1.5 billion people who don't get to vote. It is an autocracy. President Xi here hosted, again, not reported at all in the Western press, the third Belt and Road Forum. The Belt and Road Initiative, as it's more broadly known, this is an $8 trillion initiative, which is expanding infrastructure funded by China across, I think it's 86 countries and 2/3 of world population and half of world GDP. This is the kind of empire power grab which China is pushing as part of the Global South Initiative. And you can see how this plays out within the Middle East. Because if you take a map of the Belt and Road Initiative, it goes from China through Central Asia, through the Middle East, into Europe and Africa. So the Middle East is pivotal. And these routes show the railways and roads, the main routes of the Belt and Road Initiative. This is China's attempt to economically coerce the rest of the world into its orbit of influence. So you're already seeing China play peacemaker within the Middle East. It's already worked with Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's active in Saudi Arabia as the biggest trade partner of Saudi Arabia. And let's not forget, as the US withdrew from the Middle East, China entered that vacuum. So, as one example, Afghanistan, the US pulled out in awful fashion. I think it was 2 years ago now. Pulled out of Afghanistan. That was a symbol that the US was retreating from the Middle East. The biggest fund of infrastructure investment in Afghanistan last year was China. They spent, I think, $30 billion on infrastructure, building out, rebuilding Afghanistan for the Afghans and the Taliban. But like it or not, that is making friends. China's making friends across this region. And I think we're going to see China become much more active in the role of peacemaker, as opposed to the US, which is seen more as a war maker, sadly, given the last 30 years. So the Middle East, keep an eye on China's influence there and its broader-based Belt and Road Initiative. And you can see in China, this China-US rapprochement, the great powers now. I mean, China is almost as powerful as the States, more powerful in certain areas. China is becoming more active, is a little bit more aggressive in certain areas. You can see this US Treasury holdings. So China used to own $1.3 trillion of US Treasuries. It now owns probably south of 800 billion by this point and is reducing it. And is buying gold instead, by the way. That's why gold is going up, or part of the reason. And in Taiwan, encroachments into Taiwanese airspace, or the buffer zone between them, this shows air sorties and sea sorties by Chinese vessels through 21, 22, and 23. You can see the extent to which that's picked up. So Taiwanese tensions are real. Chinese activity in the sea and air around Taiwan is higher than it's ever been. At a time, and this is a bit of a trend, the US has withdrawn, strangely, from Taiwanese activity. These are Taiwanese strait crossings by the US Navy, 21, 22, 2023. You can see how much they've reduced in activity. So the US is actually stepping away from Taiwan, despite its rhetoric, and China is again stepping into that vacuum. We had the Taiwanese elections earlier this year. The incumbent Taiwan won, the DPP. They are aggressively anti-China. So China is going to be stepping up its Taiwanese activity, or continuing to do so. And before we get on to Trump, just on Taiwan, I suspect in Taiwan what we're going to see is more activity, as I've just described. I actually doubt China wants to invade Taiwan. The army will be ready in a couple of years to do so. But I think China is playing the game of a hard hand shown militarily, but a soft hand shown economically, and will coerce Taiwan into its sphere of orbit of influence, rather. In the same way it effectively took over Hong Kong by stealth, which the US and West did absolutely nothing about. The UK did nothing about. And Hong Kong is now very much a part of China without a shot being fired, apart from obviously some very unfortunate demonstrations. So I think we'll see the similar thing with Taiwan. But the picture globally is a much more assertive global south stroke east, a much more assertive China, a more assertive Russia, clearly, a more assertive Iran and Saudi Arabia. And President Biden would appear to have kind of allowed that to happen, dare I say. And I think we're going to see potentially a very different outcome if the US election goes the way I suspect it will, and President Trump becomes president again. So let's see what that looks like. This is President Trump. He's still called president. When he becomes president again, he'll be called President 2.0. And whether it's probably worth sketching this out, because people get very emotive when it becomes President Trump. He's an enormously divisive figure. So my comments about him winning are nothing to do with either liking or not liking the human being, or liking or not liking the president. I just think it's likely he will win. So we need to face the reality of what he will do when back in office. Let's look at the polls first. The polls are strikingly in favor of Trump. He has built up a commanding lead over President Biden. He's clearly won the primaries, that's obvious. He also has commanding leads in the 7 swing states, a lead of between 2% and 6% in the swing states. Those are massive leads in places like Wisconsin. So Trump is playing to the national narrative where people actually want what he's probably going to give them, certainly in part, which is, and if you've been to the States recently or lived there, you will have seen the issues around law and order, around illegal immigration, around disorder on the streets, and around securing the borders. And Trump stands, of course, for all of that. So we're going to see more of what he did in his first term, but probably more aggressive, I suspect. A 4-year national reshoring plan, that's make America great again. That's the first point. More domestic fossil fuel production, bad for the planet, but more energy independence. He will complete the war with Mexico, as Biden is now also doing, although Biden has let in a very large number of illegal immigrants in the meantime. I'll skip the drug trafficker one. Reinvest in law and order, raise police numbers on the streets. These, by the way, are from his website. These are not suppositions. And if you looked at Trump's website before he won in 2016, it was very clear. He was very clear what he was going to do. There was a 10-point plan, and he did every single point. He executed on every single one. So I expect him to execute on these. So this is not supposition. This is what he will do. Electoral reform of voting procedures. This is things like postal ballots. Term limits for members of Congress, I think, is a sensible thing. And we've got octogenarians in Congress, which I actually don't think is a great idea. That probably sounded ageist, but we've seen some instances where that may not play out well. Electoral reform of voting procedures, let's see how that goes. You know, we're into an autocratic kind of conversation there, which we can discuss. And then overseas, invest in next generation missile defense shield and restore robust American leadership abroad. And what we did see under Biden is, as I say, offshore actors or Eastern actors, global South actors, becoming more aggressive. North Korea was a great example. Trump engaged with Kim Jong-un in North Korea and actually kept him quiet. And you can see on the right opinion polls, everyone's terrified about North Korea back in 2016-17. No one's terrified today, or less so, because Trump put him back in his box. So like Trump or not, I think he probably did quite a good job on North Korea. Iran, another example. Okay, nuclear accord agreement. This is Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. This is interesting. This is what they make bombs out of. Across the way, in the middle there, US leaves nuclear deal. Biden becomes president. So no activity during Trump. Biden becomes president. Trump steps away. Iran has been enriching uranium with impunity of late. And I'd be surprised if Iran doesn't either have or very soon have a nuclear weapon, which is a scary thing in its own right. Okay, that's the global scene. So, and I come on to South Africa now. Oh, by the way, I left the UK out, partly because a lot of you live in the UK and have some very clear views on this, and maybe would like to talk more about offshore stuff, but also because it seems pretty clear cut to me. Keir Starmer's going to win. Labour will get back in after, 13 years of Tory rule. The Tory party does look very tired. Probably time for change. And let's see what Keir Starmer and his cabinet does. I have no great opinion on that. They seem quite business friendly from this conversation's point of view. And let's see how they go. In South Africa, South African Chamber of Commerce, South African elections are coming up on May 29th this year. The ANC, our local dominant party and the party of initial revolution, remains the dominant party. ANC at the top there, followed by the DA and the EFF. But the ANC's support is dropping below 50%. So latest polls would be the ANC is running at about 45%. That's what we expected to land at. So the ANC will have to look for the first time for a coalition with either the DA or the EFF, or some smaller parties on the right there. We think that the ANC will come together with some of the smaller parties, so a muddle through kind of coalition, and South Africa goes on kind of as before, if not a little bit more messy. And politics here in South Africa are, as many of you know, very messy. But the ANC is under pressure. Look at this chart. Which direction is the government going in? Wrong direction strong. Most people think the government is going in completely the wrong direction. Load shedding is still a problem. We'll belabor this point, but electricity cuts in South Africa are a big problem. continue to be. And this shows you that voters care about that. And if it's not fixed, they will vote against the ANC. Load shedding is getting fixed very slowly, but the government is running out of time. So that's South Africa a little bit on the precipice here. So we're hoping for at least a kind of a muddle through kind of outcome. Okay, I'm 25 minutes in. I'm going to spend 10 minutes on technology, and then we can come back to the geopolitical landscape. Okay, these are the trends which happen despite politics, despite elections, despite geopolitics. It just keeps on going. And I'm going to give you some examples of what I've described as the most extraordinary exponential decade of progress we have ever lived through. And it is just starting to accelerate again. So I'm going to give you some examples of current technologies which are landing now, which only a few years ago was science fiction. First one, robo-taxis. These are autonomous vehicles run by Waymo. They are now active across San Francisco. They've just got a license to be active along the freeways, and so can pick you up from LAX airport. No driver. And robo-taxis are now a reality and are kind of course, for those of you who know, 85% more or 85% safer than a human driver. We will, of course, look back in 10 years' time and wonder at the time when we drove these large vehicles around with impunity and kept killing people. Still the largest cause of death globally. 1.6 million people per annum are killed by cars, almost all caused by humans. Flying taxis. Flying electric air taxis are now operating above New York. This is the first trial by Joby. This will be Manhattan to JFK Airport in 7 minutes, as opposed to an hour and a half stuck in traffic. Licensings are being done now. Still already active in Dubai and other places. Science fiction 3 years ago, now happening. This is the speed of exponential progress. This is why things happen so much more quickly than we ever realize, because we're used to linear progress, not exponential. Electric cars. This is the number one selling car in 2023. This is the Tesla Y, I think. It sold 1.6 million units last year. The best-selling car in the world is now an electric vehicle. Again, 5 years ago, we didn't expect that to happen. It's happened fast. Okay, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. It's a quote by Ray Kurzweil, who's head of engineering at Google, and wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, 30 years ago, which predicted every single technological development since. Extraordinary man. He said 2029 is when AI will achieve human levels of intelligence. Elon Musk has said this morning in a quote overnight that AI will be smarter than the smartest human by the end of next year. So AI is happening, obviously, as we speak, and it's going to change our lives forever within the next year. A simple example, a couple of examples here. Simple one, AI assistants. We will all have a personalized AI agent in our phone or in our ears, wherever it is. They will not only perform tasks for us, they will predict, of course, that actually you haven't been out for dinner for a few nights or a few weeks. How about I booked this restaurant? Oh, I booked it already. Or you have an appointment coming up. I booked a autonomous vehicle to take you to the next appointment. AIs will predict exactly what we need, when we need it, including how money flows and what we might want to buy next. Lots of examples of AI, but one which was interesting to me, in Denmark, they trained AI on the life events of every single person. I assume the Danish kind of agreed to this, all their data. It can now predict the likely death rate of Danish people within Denmark and things like where you might die and when. So if you'd like to know your death date, AI will tell you very soon. Robots. I'll run through these fairly quickly because I want to leave some time for questions at the end. These are the number of robots at Amazon. Okay, 1,000 in 2013, 750,000 today, 750,000. Amazon is the second largest employer in the world after Walmart. It employs 1.5 million people. Half of those are now robots. Extraordinary. This little guy carrying stuff around. Robots are happening. This is the Tesla humanoid robot. Was launched 2 months ago. It does extraordinary things. It will make an omelette for you. That could have helped me this morning ahead of this webinar. Textile, dexterity, extraordinary. So robots are coming, and Remy Robotics just raised $1 billion. to roll out a suite of restaurants run only by robots. That's starting in New York City, called Better Days. That is happening now. So restaurants run by robots is happening today. Would you like to be the bionic man? You now can. You have 1 horsepower on your back, which means you can run faster and walk faster and carry heavier weights. You can offset 30 kilograms of weight. This is run by a company called Hypershell. This is the Pro X, and allows you to run uphill as if it's nothing. Okay, stem cell grown meat. Some controversy in the States about this. This is now a reality. This is a Michelin-starred restaurant. Stem cell grown chicken. This is not plant-based. This is the stem cell of the chicken grown into a chicken breast, and you then eat it. This will transform agriculture as we know it. I think that's fairly obvious, and will reduce carbon dioxide emissions materially as we'll have fewer cattle around. I think penultimately, CRISPR medicine. CRISPR is the gene editing technology which can cure ultimately all diseases. CRISPR technology has just been approved for the first time in the UK. This was, I think, 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago. The US has also now approved the first therapy using CRISPR technology, gene editing technology. Take out the bad gene, replace it with a healthy one. This tackles sickle cell disease. Next one is gene editing therapy to lower cholesterol. I'd appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of other people would. That would be very helpful. And life longevity is something I might close with, which is an extraordinary progression, which is happening again right now. Spaceflight, I'm going to go through this very quickly. SpaceX, another Elon Musk venture. These are from the SpaceX website. Science fiction. Elon Musk said he was going to go to Mars 5 years ago, 3 years ago. Science fiction. It's happening now. Starship has been built. It's undergone its 3rd test flight, and the 4th one is coming up soon. It's been, they're getting more and more successful, let's just say that. It will be able to carry 100 tons of cargo and 100 passengers. It'll take 7 months to get to Mars. It'll refuel above the Earth and then keep going to Mars, 7 months to get there. And Elon Musk is building dozens of these things, or will build dozens of these things. And they will head to Mars and land on Mars in their dozens and ultimately hundreds. And we will build pods and we will arrive on Mars. And that'll happen within, I would wager, within the next few years. Let's call it that. Finally, brain power. This is important. This is a lady called Pat Bennett. She suffered a stroke and was unable to speak. A brain implant allows her brain to talk directly to the computer in question here. This is Stanford University. Her brain speaks directly to the computer and the computer types her words. She now has a vocabulary of 120,000 words and can type at 63 words per minute. 120,000 words is twice the normal human. Her brain talking directly to the computer. This is now a reality. And this man suffered from Parkinson's disease, couldn't walk for 20 years, had an implant put into the top of his spine at the base of his brain, allows the brain to talk again to the limbs because there's a disassociation between the brain and the limbs. This gentleman can walk again. It is literally a miracle using a brain implant. And Neuralink has implanted the first, again, thank you, Elon Musk, the first brain chip into a human. It's worked very, very well. The human can now play video games using just his brain. You can watch this online if you'd like. And ultimately, that Neuralink chip, which is embedded in your brain, will be able to talk directly to the internet, and we will be attached full-time to the internet, all-knowing, all-wise, Homo Deus. Extraordinary revolutions coming through as we speak. That happened last month. And the final one I put in because it's kind of amused me, 3D printing, transforming manufacturing, as many of you know. 3D printing, they can now get to the point where they can 3D print from outside of, they can scan outside the body to 3D print within your body to fix a broken bone. So you inject the material to cover your bone, and the 3D printer scans it and builds up the layer, which heals your bone from the outside. And if you remember Star Trek, that happening, science fiction, that is now becoming a reality. And all these things are going to be in a world where life longevity is going to mean that we have to get used to a world where our children's children will be able to live healthily forever. I will leave that thought with you and look forward to questions. I hope that was enjoyable and look forward to chatting right now. Thank you.
Well, I am not sure if I should be absolutely terrified or whether I should be absolutely amazed. So much of what you're talking about is going to happen in our lifetimes without question. I know when we looked at our grandparents, they've seen amazing, amazing change. A couple of questions that I've got. Can you just go back to we always talk about the global south, and that map clearly shows that it's not south, it is the global green. Please give us some background as to why it got called the global south and how it's built into that swathe that goes up into the northern hemisphere.
Sure. It's just a really bad name. It kind of morphed out of nowhere, and I'm hoping someone will come up with a better name. I'm even trying myself to come up with a better name, but we haven't done it yet. It's actually more accurate to say East v West, but I think that's a little
But
emotive.
that also doesn't work because Australia says, what about us? We're stuck on the wrong side of it again. And then you've got Japan on the wrong side of it. So I also looked at that one and thought maybe global green and global red's going to work, but then people are going to get upset over colours. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how that materializes. You talked quite interestingly about the Trump that we probably don't know or didn't recognize or didn't package up together in terms of achievements. I found that a very interesting view on somebody I'd not seen before. So if you look at the change that we're starting to feel is likely to transition from Biden to Trump, and most of us go, oh my goodness, the rest of us say brilliant, and we are so divided on the human being as well as the outcomes. What sort of 5 years are we going to expect ahead of us?
Okay, yes, Trump is always a very difficult one. And when I'm in the United States, one almost can't raise it in polite company. People can't get past the emotions of the man. It's very important in the world to accept things as they are, as opposed to the way you'd like them to be. And the way it's going to be is that Trump will be president, in my view. And so you have to disassociate the man, who I think is probably just an awful human being. And the tweets reflect that, and the comments reflect that. Remove the man from what he actually does as a president. So you need to treat it as the office of the president. And I think a couple of things are going to happen. He will be very strong on illegal immigration. He will close the border. He'll be very strong on law and order. And I think that all actually needs to happen. I think that's actually very sensible, because if you've been in Seattle, you've been in LA, San Francisco, New York, it is not great right now. And it's not the fault of the people there. It's just the law and order is broken down. It's just really awful. So be very strong domestically. Offshore is the interesting thing for me. It will be utterly chaotic, as it was last time. But we may find ourselves with a better ordered outcome as a result. So when you've got the rise of the strongmen, President Xi, strongman, President Erdogan in Turkey, MBS in Saudi Arabia, President Putin in Russia, these people in the global south are stepping into, I'm going to call it a vacuum created by the US right now. And it's not, in a sense, President Biden's fault, because the US as an empire is starting to contract and fail. And I've written papers about this, and I can share these papers if it's of interest to people. How do empires collapse? And the US is collapsing in the same way the Roman Empire did. The Roman Empire took 300 years to collapse. This is going to take a little while. But while it's falling, let's say that, these power brokers come up. So in the meantime, you need a very strong person in the office of the president to counteract those forces. Otherwise, the West is going to lose quite quickly. So I think we're going to see butting heads in that sense, but it'll push the strong men back a little bit, and you'll get a more ordered actual outcome in the midst of what will be a bunch of very confusing and awful noise. So try and look through the noise. Try and look through what's actually happening as a result. And I think, dare I say it, we're going to get a better result than we've had in the last 4 years, which in terms of outputs has been really appalling. When if you look at the wars going on and the conflicts going on and the rise of certain nations which are finding their voice in the world.
Thank you for that. I think I will look upon this election a little differently to what I did the last time I was looking at it. You talked on two occasions about activities that are happening east of us, of Africa, Europe, UK, the east side of us. You said, interestingly, X and Y, two specific incidences, one the Belt and Road and the other one I think was to do with Russia or Ukraine, where you were saying that it was not recorded or reported in the West. Please share with us what is happening that we are not being informed. Where's the press coming from? Where's us being globally informed? What's breaking down?
I can only comment on what I see, and what I see in terms of, I'll call it Western media, is a deliberate quietening of what's actually happening in the East of the rest of the world, and that is being, in some cases, muted. I'll take the interview with President Putin as one example. The reporting on that was horrific. It was simply this perhaps a madman. He talks about history for half an hour. That was not what was interesting in the conversation. It was a really interesting conversation. So Russia asked to join NATO in 1999. I didn't actually know that. Apparently, it's been well documented. I wasn't aware of that. Russia asked to join NATO. They asked Bill Clinton. Putin asked Clinton. Clinton said yes. Clinton then discussed it with his advisors as to whether he should have said yes. And his advisor said no. And Clinton went back to Putin and said, no, you can't. So Putin was putting up an olive branch. Because remember, in those days, Russia was becoming westernized. It was becoming part of the club. And the final manifestation of that was for Russia to join NATO. So NATO becomes defunct because we don't have to defend against. It was a genius move. But not only did Clinton first say yes, and then the state said no. Even worse, the US rebuffed Putin. Now, I'm not saying Putin's a good guy or anything like that, but there are certain instances where there's two sides to the story. So Russia Today, the state channel in Russia, it's been cancelled. You can't watch it in the West, which I think is appalling. Because if you're at war with someone, you want to know what they're thinking. We have no idea what Russia's thinking. You can now get Russia Today online. In fact, I get it online. I watch Russia Today online. That doesn't make me a Russia dove or anything like that. I just want to be informed in terms of what they're thinking, what their populace is hearing. I watch Al Jazeera to get the other side of, dare I say, the Palestinian conflict, to the way the CNN portrays it. So I'm not saying it's a deep state kind of propaganda thing, but news editors choose what they want to show. And they want to show something which is pro-West, because that flies better, and something which is anti-East. And so things like the Belt and, there was a very interesting African forum the other day. The Belt and Road Initiative Forum was fascinating. President Xi met with MBS in Saudi Arabia in December, hosted a Middle Eastern summit for the Global South, in fact. Fascinating. But you can only get that if you dig around online and go to primary sources, as opposed to, dare I say it, watching CNN all day.
That is very worrying for a global citizen. You know that the slant on things could have been different, but not hearing about it is a very different position for us to be in. The question I want to ask around the AI side of things is, what do you think is going to be different to you, I, and those of us listening tomorrow? What's going to change immediately that we will say in the next 12 months, these are the things that we are going to have to catch up on, going to experience, going to change our lives?
Well, I'll tell you one thing which is going to be up front and center very quickly, and is already happening now, is the US election. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be bombarded with fake videos and fake quotes. We will be bombarded with videos of President Biden falling over when he didn't really fall over. We'll be bombarded with President Biden making verbal gaffes when he didn't actually make one. He does make quite a lot already, must be said. But we'll be bombarded at just the wrong time for Biden, like on the eve of the election, whatever it is. Because these fake videos, I'm sure many of you have seen them, they're completely authentic. I mean, they're like the real thing. So in terms of the feed we all get off our social media screens, it is going to become swamped with fake news. So that's going to become very difficult to navigate. And again, as far as one possibly can, get to the primary source to avoid an opinion online or something which is posted out of the blue. Check it. So you have to check everything now. And that and that feeds across the polarity of society. And that polarity is only going to get worse as a result because most people don't check it. So the element of fakeness, which is driven by AI, is going to explode in the next 12 months and in the next 6 months. So that's a big one. And I guess the broader point I would make, I think, is that, I mean, our civilized, mostly civilized society is built on our ability to talk to each other and communicate with each other in the written word and the visual word. And all those things are now being replicated by AI. So our ability to communicate effectively with each other is going to be undermined. So can you trust the book you've just read was not written by an AI? Can you trust the video you just saw? Amazing movie was not made by an AI. Or was it made by your favorite director? So the trust quotient in terms of our basic means of communication is going to be severely undermined. And that's going to be a massive challenge in the next couple of years for all of us to navigate.
Taking that last point, in the boardroom, it is difficult enough for business, for chairman, directors, executive directors, to understand each other, respect each other, trust each other, make the right decisions, not be biased. And I just look at how challenged a group of anything between 3 and 12 people are in trying to be the best leading machine, sorry to use that word, of the organization. What must chairman, directors, boards be watching out for so that they don't get caught up in this noise and do all the wrong things?
Well, the challenge here will be to, as a chairperson, or a board, is to hold a polarity of tension between two things. The two things are, number one, you do need to be agile enough to be able to shift within a changing world, because things are going to change very quickly. You get new real information, which you check. You do need to be able to respond quickly. So that's one side of the polarity. The other side of the polarity is to have, and this is more important, a true north in terms of where you're going as a business. Because if you don't have a true north, you're just going to be flicked all over the place and the winds of change. So you have to have a strategic plan and a vision, dare I say it, which you actually all believe in. If you don't have that, you're going to be sunk in the waves of change. So you have to be able to hold the tension of that polarity between true north and agility.
How should South Africa leading business in SMEs and big corporates, what should they be watching out for? What should they be doing differently in terms of global trade?
Okay, so I think operating as a private enterprise within South Africa is perhaps a little bit different, but perhaps not. And it comes back to obviously the true north thing I was talking about earlier. Because if you look at the engine of economic power within South Africa, it is, dare I say it, the private sector. The public sector, in terms of government, hasn't got a lot of things right. I think there's a lot of well-intentioned individuals, a lot of non-well-intentioned individuals, but they haven't broadly got things right. So how has South Africa kept going? It's the private sector which has pushed ahead and done things despite the government. So load shedding is one example. Power cuts, terrible for industry. Response, huge imports of solar panels. So solar panels on retail outlets, on logistical centres, on houses. Enormous transformation. So the electricity grid in South Africa is being kind of transformed, privatised by stealth. And that's a necessary factor. It's one that the Prime Minister's, the President's very aware of, actually. And so as a private company, we must keep on doing that as an enterprise. That's what South Africa thrives on.
South Africa is extremely innovative in that respect. It's and agile and resilient. We managed to survive all sorts of things that we are destined never possibly to survive. If you were to give a prediction on the rand, taking into account purchasing power parity and things like that, where would you see the rand in the next 1 to 5 years?
Yeah, sure. Well, the long-term outlook for the rand is a simple question of inflation differentials. So inflation in South Africa is 5 to 6. Overseas, it's 2 to 4 these days. So you've got a 2 to 3% depreciation guaranteed every year, if everything else stayed equal. So being, let's say, positive on the rand, you're batting against the crowd there. In terms of tactics, and could the rand actually strengthen from here? Let's take that, because it's easy to say it'll weaken. I would say sentiment towards South Africa internationally, and you can see it in the bond holdings or the level of bond holdings within the country of offshore investors investing in, is very, very poor. So sentiment is very poor. People are expecting a bad election result. They're expecting more load shedding. They're expecting more political strife. They're expecting more economic weakness. And they may well be right on that. But if they're a little bit wrong, on the positive side, the rand will strengthen. So the position or the bet as an investor right now, if you wanted to be positive rand, and I think I probably am a little bit positive rand, is that South Africa will be a little bit less catastrophically bad than people think it will be.
So we're still seeing a declining rand, which is one of the initiatives to support South African exports into the world and to bring hard currency into the country. So it can be, if South Africa can innovate to import less and export more, that will start to create a counterbalance to the rand as well. So that's an interesting possibility. One of the modern agenda items that are extremely critical and relevant to our society is the ESG elements, the climate change, what we need to do to stop the winds blowing people off trucks at the Toys Cliff. The climate change element, the ESG element, doing the right thing by our planet. What is the risk that particularly Trump as president brings to that global initiative to do something better about it? Is there a risk?
I think there's a material risk of that, more so than the last time, because in my experience in the States with clients, the skepticism actually around ESG on the ground in the States is rising. And the doomsayers who are kind of against it are finding a voice. For whatever reason, we can discuss that another day. But Trump will be talking to an accepting narrative in that sense. So I think the effect of Trump being against climate change, in that sense, will be more profound because he's sowing on more fertile ground. So I do think that's a material risk. Europe is still very much in the vanguard. Africa is still very much in the vanguard. Asia's kind of, doesn't really care yet. Middle East certainly getting there. But the States could take a major step backwards, which is obviously a big problem. The biggest problem, of course, is China, because of the state, where it is. I mean, China is approving 2 coal-fired power stations a week. Okay? So, and now emits twice what the US emits and is rising at a steep rate. So we may be barking up the wrong tree here in terms of solving this issue.
Very interesting in that respect. And a Trump government, positive or negative to South Africa as a general assessment? And I'm sorry, I have to take that as our last question. We're running out of time.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly hoping positive because South Africa is currently in the naughty box because it is the bilateral relationship between South Africa and America is currently under review by Congress. So the whole nature of our relationship is currently actively under review, which is very scary for South Africa. And if you haven't seen the documents, you should read them. That'll come up in the next couple of months. I'm certainly hoping Trump, as a business person and a pragmatist, will understand the importance of South Africa in its own right and as a key ally on the African continent, so that we maintain good bilateral relations. And I think Trump will see through the other issues and focus on the business side of that pragmatic conversation and will be more favorable, I'll predict, than currently.
It's a difficult one with some of the alignments that South Africa can take and the involvement of some of those big powers in Africa. So yes, this is going to be challenging whichever way we look at it. Somebody also made a statement, are we expecting, due to this increased longevity, for life cover premiums to reduce? So can we have that as our last fun question?
I definitely can't make any predictions about old mutual life premiums. I'm not sure that's in my remit. But I think the life longevity thing is going to change everyone's perspective on pension funds, life insurance, workplace. I've advised my children they'll probably work until they're 90 plus years old, quite healthily. So, get into your career, but also be patient. It's going to be a long road.
So we're going to live longer. People who do work for us are going to change, and they're going to speak to us differently, and they're going to be made of different material to us. Life is definitely going to change. Thank you very, very much, Howell. It was absolutely fascinating. Usually when we listen to presentations and they start getting past the 10-minute mark, you're thinking, I hope this person finishes quickly. Honestly, I've never seen an hour go so fast. Absolutely enlightening. And I think we've got a session coming probably in 6 months' time. You're going to tell us a whole bunch of new stuff already by then. Thanks very much for your time. Highly appreciate it. I'm sorry we've run over 2 minutes. Thanks very much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Nice to see you all. Thank you.